Hello and welcome to Talk Truth. My name is Corey Huntsberger. I've got my father, Alan Huntsberger, in the studio. And Dad, we're going to start off with my favorite foundational verse to get us going on this conversation today that's going to be awesome. I love this topic. But let's start off with the earth and everything in it. The world and its inhabitants belong to the Lord. Did you read that? The earth and everything in it. The world and its inhabitants belong to the Lord. That's equal ground right there. For he laid the foundation on the seas and established it on the rivers, Psalm 24, 1 and 2. Well, we got Dr. Stanley. He's the author of DEI Exposed, How the Biggest Con of the Century Almost Toppled Higher Education. He's a clinical full professor of strategic management at Drexel University. He holds a doctorate and master's in international relations and security from Duke University and an international MBA from Temple University. He's also, we're going to talk about this one, Alan. He's the author of a number of books, but including Brutal Minds, The Dark World of Left-Wing Brainwashing in Our Universities. Dr. Stanley, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks so much, Corey and Alan. It's great to be here. You've got a reputation of being erudite fellows, and your audience is just as erudite and learned. So it's going to be a wonderful experience, I'm sure, as we chat about this important issue of DEI.
Well, you wrote the book, DEI Exposed, How the Biggest Con of the Century Almost Toppled Higher Education. Alan, I couldn't agree with you more on that title. Can you tell us a little bit what persuaded you to write this, especially being in universities yourselves? What persuaded you?
Well, it goes back to 2020. I was writing a different book. I was writing Brutal Minds, and I was also writing about the increase or the creeping into management and business of Marxism, et cetera, trying to swat that away. And then I suddenly realized that in 2021, that the BLM riots of 2020 and the COVID pandemic, which caused people to retreat and resulted in a government crackdown on businesses, et cetera, I thought that people would, I was very surprised. I thought that people would respond differently at the time. And I found that rather than look at this doctrine of DEI in a kind of reasonable academic way and say, you know what, this makes no sense. This is fraudulent. Instead, the doors of the university were opened up. And I spoke out at the time that a lot of this was nonsense. A lot of it was pseudoscience. It's the kind of thing that we expunged from the university over the last couple of centuries, alchemy and astrology and superstition and pseudosciences of every sort in favor of the pursuit of truth and the generation of actual knowledge. And suddenly the doors are opened up for a group of people who are modestly educated, mediocrities with no discernible skill sets, and they are given carte blanche on the university campuses in a bureaucracy that reaches into every corner. And suddenly we faculty are finding ourselves being hectored by these morons that, this is what you have to teach. This is what you have to, who you have to hire. This is what has to be in the curriculum. It's like, who are you people? Where do these people come from, and why is the administration paying them exorbitant salaries to do virtually nothing? And that kind of opens your eyes whenever you say, where is the reasoned response of people who are supposed to be intelligent? And I found that there really wasn't a whole lot of intellect. I should say there's probably smart people, the administrators, but they certainly have no backbone. And they basically acquiesce to a scam, what I call a confidence game, very similar to what Jesse Jackson was doing back in the 80s and 90s, which was this. It basically say, they did this corporations. That's a nice business you have there. Be ashamed if something happened to it. Why don't you pony up some donations to my Operation Push, and we'll make sure nothing happens to it. It's a protection racket. And these DLI functionaries did the very same thing. These guys are grifters. They are con artists. And they said to the university, you know what? These BLM riots, you got a great university there. Be ashamed if these riots and unrest came to your university. Tell you what, you hire us, put us in a massive bureaucracy, pay us lots and lots of money, and we'll make sure that doesn't happen to you. So that was basically the impetus of DEI Exposed, bringing these louts into the sunlight and saying, calling it, use the old term, the emperor's new clothes. You have no clothes. What you deal in is pseudoscience. It's fake. And we need to get rid of you.
Yeah.
One of the things that hit me about all this in the beginning was the loss of free speech. And when you start seeing universities like Berkeley, et cetera, in California and whatever, who, you know, in the 70s, 60s and 70s, free speech was what it was all about.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden we were seeing people come into the university to speak, and there was an intolerance to what they were saying. And it got to the place where they were actually being refused to be invited into the universities to share, which was, why is this happening? What is the problem with free speech? And it's interesting how in the Constitution, free speech is so important to be able to, whether you agree with the other side or not, to be able to share openly and honestly about it.
Well, you know, you mentioned a good point. At Berkeley, the free speech movement back in 1964 and Mario Savio, and this is a reaction to the communist speaker bans on the campuses, which really motivated young people. I think that was a mistake to ban communist speakers. I think the best thing to do is to let them speak and discredit themselves through vigorous questioning. And so we find that today, almost the exact opposite happens, where you've got, when I say conservative speakers, I'm talking about mainstream speakers. I'm talking about proponents of the free market, talking about proponents of limited government. I'm even talking a little bit about Ayn Rand. Someone like that, someone as secular as Ayn Rand is, again, vilified on the campuses. Milton Friedman, Thomas Sowell, anyone who has anything to say or do about free market economics, or good things to say about capitalism, which is actually the Marxist term for the free market economy, they're not welcome on the campuses. People who have any kind of inquisitive nature about the so-called, the regime of racialism, which is upon which DEI is constructed. It is a regime of racialism. It is a very primitive Manichaean ideology that goes back over 1,000 years. We've seen Manichaean doctrines arise since the time of the cleric Mani, the Iranian cleric Mani, who believed there were children of the light, children of dark, and there's no in between. And we find this type of binary expressed today. And anyone who questions this, and I can give you an anecdote on my own campus, whenever I actually questioned the notion in a public forum, the notion that, well, you said that our institution is institutionally racist and it's systemically racist, and there's a lot of racists running around here. Why don't you name the people, the policies, the programs, and procedures that you find are racist, so that we can then work together to banish this racism from our campus if it's so doggone terrible? No answer. In fact, an accusation against me that I was part of the program or the problem at my own university, which is really the fundamental response of a conspiracy theorist. Conspiracy theorists can be identified because they are hostile to questions. They are hostile to the query of, can you provide some proof, an example, some evidence of this theory of yours? And when you ask them, they exhibit an incredible hostility, and they accuse you of being part of the conspiracy.
Yeah. We're noticing in Canada, there's a university in Lethbridge where they're in, I think they're in court right now. And it didn't even have to be, a lecture that the students are, have to attend. It was like just the presence of someone on the campus was hurting someone's feelings. And because of that, they got banned from even coming on and speaking. This has gone so ridiculous now. We're going to talk about, it's starting to dismantle itself now a little bit because it's just so ridiculous. But how did this start? When did this begin? Because Alan had a good point. We used to have Berkeley that allowed all sides, any sides, everybody come on and speak. Right. And now we're like shutting everything down except for the agenda of the DEI agenda. When did this start and how did it start?
Well, DEI has been around under various names for quite some time. If you really want a start point, and it's hard to really pinpoint, so I'd say at the beginning of the century, the year 2000, 2001, this is whenever education schools began to embrace this neo-Marxist, crypto-Maoist Paulo Freire as a way to inject Marxism into the education curriculum. You can't say Marx, you can't use the M word, but you can use the F word, which is Paulo Freire, Brazilian educator, crypto-Maoist, and was a Marxist who became a Marxist in the 60s, has a great influence on the education schools, who generate a lot of the quasi-academics who embrace this DEI. Now, DEI has been around outside the university for many years. You've got these what I call peanut grifters. This comes out of the lingo of the con artists. A peanut grift is a very short-term con, like a fortune teller, which basically takes your money for telling you a lie about your future. And this is what DEI consultants have been doing for many, many years. In 2020, 2021, the doors to the university were opened to the peanut grifters to run the big con. And here's how it works, in the sense that when I say big con, I'm talking about confidence gain. And psychology, and the literature of psychology has a word for this, or a phrase for this. It's called virtuous victimhood. And the scam, or the resource extraction strategy, is to convince people that you are a victim, and to convince the people in an institution or the people who run the institution that they are villains. And if you can get them to believe this, you can then extract reparations from them. And it's a resource extraction strategy that is used quite often. And what we have, this bureaucracies that we see on the higher education campuses, is part of that resource extraction strategy. Going back to Berkeley, the chief DEI officer for Berkeley is a person by the name of Dania Matos. And she was hired at a sum of $331,000 a year. And I read several interviews with her and said, "What is your job, Dean or Provost Matos?" And she says, "Well, I try to lead with love." They use the word love a lot for some reason. And she said this. She said, "Oh, every time," I'm paraphrasing it, but I'm not making it up. "Every time I hear of or experience a racist incident on our campus, it breaks my heart into a million pieces, and I have to start all over again, picking up and putting together those pieces." Now, she said this. Now, this is at Berkeley, one of the most radical left-wing campuses in America. And Harvard law professor Randall Kennedy said, "Universities are the least racist places in America. Why don't you look at some other places and institutions in America if you really want to find so-called racism? The campuses is not the place to look." But Berkeley has a real problem with this. High-paid functionaries with no discernible jobs or skill set, all they're doing is basically inserting themselves into various parts of the campus where they have no business, trying to impose this primitive ideology of DEI, of oppressors and oppressed, exploiters and exploited, villains and victims. And if that sounds really familiar, it's because it comes right out of Marxism, where the notion of race has replaced the notion of class. It's not a class struggle anymore. It's a racial struggle. And it's really insidious and pernicious, because I think that you, Alan, and Corey, if we're walking down the street and we see someone coming towards us, we don't know anything about them. We can maybe vaguely know how they're dressed, and maybe we'd make some preliminary judgments based on that, rightly or wrongly. On the other hand, DEI people who have soaked up this ideology of either or, they see either a villain or a victim coming towards them, because race supersedes every aspect of that person's very being. It supersedes their personal history. It supersedes their parents. It supersedes their education. It supersedes everything. Nothing is more important than their racial identity. And if you happen to be a white person, you are a villain. And if you happen to be a non-white person, you are a victim. You are a person of color. That is, as it suits the narrative, because, as you know, Asian Americans who do quite well in the United States, as well as Indian Americans, they're people of color as it's convenient for the narrative. Whenever it's not convenient and they are shown to be successful, irrespective, and in spite of this white racist America, they are called white adjacent, which means they get to partake of the so-called privilege. Now, this nasty ideology I've described portrays America as a racist country, irredeemably so, and that it is permeated with white supremacist culture. And so that is kind of like, that's been around for a long time, this primitive ideology. What's changed is it now is permeating our college campuses, and only now is being successfully, I think, rooted out.
Yeah, can we talk
Do
about
you
that for a
feel-
second?
Go
Because
ahead.
well, I know Turning Point USA with Charlie Kirk. He's doing a lot, going around campuses, having questions, filming it, throwing it up on social media. A lot of what you're talking about, it really kind of shows that these people, they have a lot of anger, a lot of hostility. They're very rude and crass and all that, but they don't have answers. You know what I mean to this DEI ideology symptom that they got going on. But we are starting to see the Trump administration get rid of DEI because it's in everything. It's in the military. It's in the school campuses. Do you feel that's helping? Are you starting to see the breakdown? If you are, where's the breakdown coming from?
Well, first I want to give a shout out to Charlie Kirk. I am indeed the faculty advisor for TPUSA
Wow.
on my own campus, and these are some of the brightest, some of the best students I've ever come across, ever met. Inquisitive, and want to do the right thing, and they really see through the hooey that is taught not necessarily in the classroom, but taught in these seminars by these DEI functionaries, these apparatchiks. And they see through this nonsense. And I basically help students understand how to, as we might say, resist or fight back against this. Now, your question is this falling apart or is it coming unglued? I think it is, as more and more people understand what we're talking about. No, DEI is, let me tell you what it's not. It's not about creating a level playing field. It's not about giving everyone a shot at the brass ring. It's not about teaching about race and just teaching about slavery. No, it's none of those things. And if any of those things actually get done, it's only as a byproduct for the imposition of this racialist binary, this horrendous primitive ideology that really puts people in one of two categories. And when people finally recognize this, I think that they go, wow, I will tell you, it takes a lot of integrity to recognize this and say, yeah, man, I've been duped. I have been suckered. I've been conned. And these are smart people who don't like to, it's best if they come to this conclusion on their own. They don't want someone like me and you telling them they've been duped, telling them they've been fooled. They should come to this on their own, cogitation. And thinking about it, put your critical thinking cap on, and for goodness sake, think it out and say, hey, shouldn't I understand what's really going on here? And rather than pouring into this empty decanter of DEI, my own feelings of my own narcissism, my own vanity, my own virtue. And so whenever you attack DEI, you're essentially attacking me. And that's, I think, the problem. One of the biggest problems, I think, also, is that these are borderline personalities who are involved in the whole DEI hustle. This hustle or grift or con really attracts paranoid people. It attracts borderline personality extremists. And I think you see a lot of these people who are, I call it the Luigi effect. Okay. It's, someone going full Luigi. I think you know what I'm talking about. It's Luigi Mangione, who killed this innocent man on the streets of New York for an ideology. And he learned that ideology somewhere, and I'm betting he learned it at the University of Pennsylvania, right across the street from where I work. And this is the problem with these ideologues, is that they begin to believe the theory, this really flawed, ugly theory, and act in accord with what the theory tells them to do, rather than believe their own senses, their own experience, their own empirical lived experience about dealing with people. They're told that someone who is a particular race is an enemy, unless that person is willing to recant and confess their turpitude and their complicity in a white supremacist culture. This is really a cramped ideology, and it's evil in the sense that it's really twisting people's minds and getting them to behave in bizarre ways, like Luigi Mangione, a killer.
Yep. Alan, you had a question. Sorry.
Well, yeah, I was just going to ask, do you feel that with all of the information that is being given now about this, including books like yours and other information that's coming, that people are becoming savvy to what's happening?
I think it's a very slow process. I think the common way of putting it is people are getting red pilled, in the sense that they are basically, the scales are falling from their eyes and say, how could I have been such an idiot to be taken in by these scam artists? And they're basically seduced by the message, which is always couched in the same way that a cult will couch its message when it's trying to get new recruits into the, and I've done a lot of study on cults. You'll find that in my first book on this topic, which is, again, is Brutal Minds, which has an entire chapters on thought reform and how cults recruit people. And they do this by getting people to drop their guard and by offering what's called love bombing. And the Moonies, the people's, I should say, the Unification Church does this. And they do this love bombing to create an aura of warmth, of warmth and acceptance. Anything that the recruit says is wonderful. It's deep. It's everything. Their sense of humor is fantastic. Their fashion sense is wonderful. They have a great singing voice. Everything is made. They go, wow, I've never felt this much belonging in all my life, even my own family. Well, that's the idea. That's a technique that they use. And that's the technique that DEI people and folks on the campuses that are trying to get and indoctrinate people into this kind of belief system. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to change the belief system of people coming onto the campus, primarily students. But if there's any kind of weak-minded faculty and staff, they'll take them too. And they do this by propounding a message of, and I said it before, love. They'll use this word love, just like the Moonies use the term peace and unity. Okay, they don't talk about their doctrine. They don't talk about being a member of a cult. They talk about peace and unity. That's what they do. And likewise, the DEI folks talk about inclusion and belonging. Doesn't that sound like a cult phrase? Now that you know Moonies are using peace and unity, and over here you have inclusion and belonging. It's very cult-like. And you won't find out, you being, of course, the person who is being recruited, you won't find out the truth until it's far too late. You've gone too far down the road, and you've bought into the ideology, and you have dismissed what your parents have to say. I know that, Corey, you've got kids who are moving into that area of rebellion. And, I'll tell you what, the folks on the college campuses are not a friend of parents. This is a message that I give to parents. They hate you. They don't want you interfering in what they have planned for your kids. They call you helicopter parents. They call you toxic parents. They talk about wannabe parents who are living through their children. They have all kinds of names. And all of this appears in my book, Brutal Minds, the names that they call you and why they do this. They want to decouple kids, students, from the upbringing that they had at home. And this is why it's very successful, I should say. This is why parents are surprised when that first Thanksgiving comes and the kids come home from school. Yeah. The students seem so alienated from them. They seem angry about something, and they're angry at their parents for not having told them the truth about the social world. This is because the folks who have the control of the agenda on the college campuses, and I mean this very, very clearly. I mean, I'm talking about the bureaucracy, which outnumbers reasonable people 12-1, meaning liberals to conservatives 12-1. Studies have shown this. Many studies have shown this. They're messaging your kids 24/7, and the message is, you were brought up wrong. This is the truth about the social world. We're offering you hidden knowledge. And this is very intoxicating for a young person. Oh, this is what college is all about. But believe me, none of that hidden knowledge has to do with any of the debunkers such as Milton Friedman and Thomas Sowell and any of the great authors who have completed, Karl Popper, so folks who have dismantled and debunked Marxism and its various offshoots over the many, many years. Almost none of that is taught in most universities and colleges. And that is the real problem, and that's the key. In my book, Brutal Minds, and also in DEI Exposed, I provide tactics, reasonable, logical things, action items for students and faculty, students and parents to defend themselves and to prevent this type of, I would say, ideological capture from happening.
Well, we really appreciate you. Thank you so much for being on the show. Well, Alan, I'm glad we're finally having the conversation. DEI being exposed. You and I have known this. And I think what makes me angry and sad is they come off like they care about these people. And we know they don't care about these people at all. They're being used, right?
Absolutely. And They just want to get their agenda. That's their mission. That's what it's all about. And it's definitely Marxism and communism and anything without God.
Yeah, there's only one person who truly cares about you and loves you. His name is Jesus. And we're giving away this free booklet called The Living Stone, A Journey of Transformation. We will send it to you in the mail absolutely free. All you got to do is call our toll-free number, 1-800-915-0056, and request it, or call 1-800-445-3450 if you're in the U.S. Or you can go to our website, gotalktruth.com, click on resources. You can order it there as well. This booklet's important. You have to understand who God is and how much he loves you and cares for you. And you've got to build a relationship with him because he actively wants the relationship with you, right, Dad?
He does. The problem is, and as we've talked about this a lot, Corey, of having a relationship with Jesus Christ, the question is, do people actually have a relationship? I mean, we talk about, for example, being in conversation with Jesus, understanding and hearing the voice of Jesus. But, as I begin to continue to study in the Word of God, I'm finding out something that, let me just ask you one question. In 1 Peter 1:8, it says, you love him. 3 words. You love him, even though you haven't seen him. Now, the question is this true? Do we really love him? And because it goes on and says, you believe in him and rejoice in inexpressible and glorious joy. Now, do people have inexpressible and glorious joy because of God?
I do. Yes,
the
answer is yes, I do.
Good.
You do.
Yes and no. I mean, I've asked myself the question, do I let the problems of the world overtake and drown my inexpressible joy and glorious, has that taken that away from me? And I think that's where we have to guard ourselves.
Yeah, good point. If you want to help support our mission and keep this conversation on the air, we are viewer supported. You can go to our website, gotalktruth.com/donate. There's many different ways you can give digitally. If you'd like to do it through the mail, you can. You can make your check payable to Heritage Christian Ministries Association, 246 Stewart Green, Southwest, Suite 3260, Calgary, Alberta, T3H 3C8 is where you would send it. If you'd like to call for prayer, our toll-free line is open, 1-800-915-0056 in Canada, 1-800-445-3450 in the U.S. All right, Dad, we're out of time. We'll see you guys later.
Love you.